los que continúan aquí con nosotros en FAX 2022, las conferencias en las que hemos estado realmente han desafiado nuestra mente y desafiado nuestra fe a seguir buscando respuestas para todo aquel que demande razón de la esperanza que hay en nosotros. Y la entrevista de este momento no va a dejar las cosas más claras, la verdad. Vamos a taclear un tema que a bastantes les parece confuso, es muy controversial, pero realmente queremos que ustedes tengan la experiencia de conocer diferentes posturas respecto a problemas que podrían aparecer allá afuera con preguntas que las personas que no creen en Dios pueden tener. En este caso vamos a entrevistar a Tim Stratton, el doctor Tim Stratton, que va a estar hablándonos a nosotros sobre el tema del molinismo. Pero el año pasado ya tuvimos a Tim, que es un gran amigo mío, un amigo que realmente estimo bastante. El año pasado estuvo Tim con nosotros para hablar sobre el molinismo, qué es, qué intenta defender, cuál es su contraste con otras posturas, pero esta vez vamos a estar hablando con Tim sobre las aplicaciones de molinismo y qué aplicaciones, qué implicaciones puede tener hacia otras posturas y hacia un argumento muy particular que es probablemente en el que nos enfocaremos más tiempo, que es el tema del problema del mal. Nuevamente les recuerdo a toda nuestra audiencia que si bien Fe Razonable, el Dr. Craig y bastante del equipo de directores de Fe Razonable somos molinistas, esta postura no es compartida por los oradores en FAX 2022, para que no se vayan a asociar unos con otros, algunos lo aceptan, otros no, pero seguimos trabajando para poder traerles el mejor material académico para ustedes y ustedes después lo puedan. En este momento le damos la bienvenida a Tim Stratton de Free Thinking Ministries. Hey Tim, glad to
Hola.
be with you today.
Good to see you, Raul. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and it's great to see you. I know that you were with us last year, and having you again talking about this subject that you and I both love, it's really great.
Well, I think this subject is very important. I think it's the only way to think about God's sovereignty in such a way to make sense of all the biblical data and to keep God a maximally great being without taking away or subtracting or editing any of his attributes, such as his omnipotence, his omniscience, his omnibenevolence, his wrath, his justice. We could go down the list. I think it's the only way to do that. So I think this is a very important topic.
Indeed, and you started already. The interview hasn't even started, and you already are giving us good material. I don't know if you noticed, we were talking about this behind camera, about my t-shirt. Everybody knows that I am a DC fan. I like DC. Superman is my favorite DC, my favorite superhero of all times. But today I wanted to wear this particular shirt, Spider-Man. I do like Spider-Man from Marvel, especially because we're going to start tackling some subjects of that the Marvel movies touch. And I want to be appreciate of the work that they've done.
Yeah.
And I know you like Marvel too.
Well, I love Marvel. Love the Avengers. The recent Avengers movies, especially. I do love DC. Also, I just love comic books in general, and I'm also a big Star Wars fan. But I do really love the Avengers, and I've been known to incorporate Avengers illustrations to make theological points. But to be fair, I've also used some DC references in the past, as well as Star Wars. So people can go to my YouTube channel at Free Thinking Ministries, and also the my website, freethinkingministries.com, and you can find these Marvel, DC, and Star Wars references all over the place.
Yeah, they're really good, and your blog is really great. You tackle a lot of subjects there. There's a lot of good material. There's also a section in Spanish, which I'm happy to say that I collaborated translating some of your articles. Hopefully, we can see more in the future. But today, we're going to talk about a very specific subject that you've specialized. You did your PhD thesis on this, right?
That's right. And it became a book. And so people would like to read it. It's called Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism. And also just recently came out with a study guide. And you can get this on Amazon or the Whip and Stock website. And this one's really small. It's a short little book, but I really like it because it helps people who aren't necessarily scholars walk through this big book, so you can see the size difference there. But this one helps everybody go through each chapter, find the most important things that they got to take away from each chapter. And then what I really like about it is all these little sections in it you'll see called Going Deeper. And I have some of those throughout the book, throughout this little book, and it expands the arguments and makes some of them stronger and adds additional arguments. So really encourage people to get both the big book, what I call Mere Molinism, and then the Mere Molinism study guide as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tim, I've heard rumors that this book is eventually going to be in Spanish, right? Maybe not soon, but it will, right?
Oh yeah, we're working on that. It's going to take a while to get it all accomplished, but yeah, we're in the process of working on that right now.
Awesome. Yeah, it will be a great resource in Spanish because, to my knowledge, in Spanish there's just a few books on Molinism. I can recall the Molinas Concordia.
Yeah.
It is in Spanish and PDF.
That's good.
The Dr. Craig's book, The Only
Good.
Wise God. Maybe I'll show it.
Mm-hmm.
Have it here. The Only Wise God in Spanish, and Plantinga's book, God, Nature, and Free Will, or God, Nature, and Evil, something like that. But it's not specifically about Molinism, but it touches upon some of those subjects. But that's basically it that we have in Spanish. And your blog and a couple of other Spanish blogs. But yeah, books we don't have. So it would be great to have yours.
Well,
okay.
I'll pick up the pace a little bit and try to get that done quicker.
We would appreciate that, brother.
All right.
Okay, Tim, you were last year with us. I was explaining to our audience that you were last year with us explaining what Molinism is. And I would encourage everybody to watch that interview and a couple of other videos that we can recommend to get in touch and more familiar with the overall definition of Molinism. Because today we're going to focus specifically on the applications of Molinism to the problem of evil and the other apologetic appliances that we can, the tool, the usefulness of Molinism, basically. But for those who are just joining for the first time, let's give a definition of Molinism, and then we'll touch upon what you're specialized on, but is mere Molinism.
All right. Well, Molinism, I like to say, is a model of God's sovereignty, which I contend is implied and supported by the text of Scripture. The ideas behind Molinism actually go all the way back to the AD 300s. But Luis de Molina kind of connected all of the theological dots logically and placed labels on certain pre-existing concepts. So Molinism is derived from his last name, Molina. Now, sadly, some Christians today reject the view just because it shares the name of a Spanish Jesuit from the 16th century. But this is the epitome of the genetic fallacy. Just because somebody you don't agree with is known for the concept, that doesn't make it false. So we have to look at the biblical support and think about the Bible logically to see if Molinism is true or false. But be that as it may, in a nutshell, we can describe Molinism as a model of God's complete sovereignty and predestination that doesn't violate human freedom or responsibility. And so both things seem to be taught in Scripture, that God is sovereign over all things and predestines all things, yet humans are free and responsible. And so we need to find a model to make sense of all this. I think Molinism is the only way that can adequately make sense of all the data.
When I was younger, I actually approached something similar to Molinism because I do believe that the Bible teaches God's complete sovereignty, that He's in control, but that humans are free in some sense. Now I know that the correct term is libertarian, and are obviously morally responsible.
Yeah.
But I just held these two in tension. And when I heard Dr. William Lane Craig explain this and flesh this out, it was like a light bulb came on. Now, let's go back. You mentioned something really interesting, and the title of your book is dedicated to this view, that is mere Molin. And many people, if they have little touch on what Molinism is, they definitely have less knowledge of what mere Molinism is. Could you describe that?
Yeah, so I guess I've become known for advancing a view called mere Molinism, which takes a page from C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. So C.S. Lewis said that you can get Christianity or mere Christianity in one sentence or one statement comprised of only 6 words. God raised Jesus from the dead, right? If that one statement, those 6 words are true, you've got mere Christianity. So God raised Jesus from the dead. That means you've got the existence of God and a historical resurrection. If those 2 things are true, you've got enough for mere Christianity. So I tried to boil Molinism down to see what do we have to have for mere Molinism. And I like to say it like this, that God possesses middle knowledge and humans possess libertarian freedom. So if that one statement and those 2 conjunctions are true, that God possesses middle knowledge and humans possess libertarian freedom, then mere Molinism is true.
Yeah, really good. And I think definitely it opens the door for other people to say, okay, if I hold to this 2 pillars, then this I might be a Molinist, right?
That's right.
I can think of several people that have embraced this mere view because of the very it doesn't commit you to everything that Molina believed. And obviously we as Protestants, evangelicals, we don't subscribe to everything that Molina subscribed. But it's really good work that you did there.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, when I've usually described Molinism, and you and your work, I've seen this as well. Primarily, Molinism is an aspect of God's omniscience. It's trying to talk about what God knows, and what kinds of knowledge, and when does God has His knowledge. If this is the case, why is Molinism constantly contrasted against more robust, I guess you could say robust views, theological robust views, as Arminianism and Calvinism?
Yeah, well, I guess 2 reasons come to mind. One, the first would be that one can apply Molinism to soteriological matters and salvation issues, but we don't have to. Now, I do, but I am friends with 5-point Calvinists who are also mere Molinists. With that said, since it's possible to apply middle knowledge to salvation issues, it's often confused with the soteriological system. Right, so that's the first reason. The second would be that many Calvinists incorrectly conflate Calvinism simpliciter with Ed. exhaustive divine determinism. So when I say ED, that's short for exhaustive divine determinism, EDD. Right. So many Calvinists incorrectly conflate Calvinism simpliciter with exhaustive divine determinism, but that's not necessary. In fact, I believe that the majority of reformers would reject ED, and well-respected Reformed theologians today continue to reject ED. So one can be well within the Reformed theological movement or practice Reformed theology and reject this exhaustive divine causal determinism that some, if not many, Calvinists today hold. But you don't have to. You can be a Calvinist. You can be a 5-point Calvinist and reject ED. You can be a 5-point Calvinist and say that sometimes, on occasion anyway, that humans do possess libertarian freedom. And often that would be said of Christians who are free to either fall into temptation or to take the way of escape that God provides. That would be libertarian freedom. Perhaps we can talk about that more later. That would also be true if we're going to talk about occasional libertarian freedom. The occasion of pre-fall Adam, right? Most theologians, even most, it seems, or at least many Calvinist and Reformed theologians would say that pre-fall Adam was not causally determined by God to fall. So that means he had libertarian freedom as well. But anyway, those are a couple of the reasons why I think Molinism is often compared and contrasted against Calvinism and Arminianism, because both of those models are both of those are soteriological models. Molinism is not, but one can apply Molinism to salvation issues. So I think that's the primary reason why it gets conflated with the others.
Very well, Tim. Now let's get into subject about one of the usefulness or the utilities of why Molinism is important, and that is the problem of evil. But before we discuss how Molinism helps us to deal with the problem of evil, could you explain to us what the problem of evil is? I know that there's also different kinds of problems of evil, and for somebody that is just beginning to deal with apologetics, they might need to differentiate between all of those.
Yeah, so basically the problem of evil comes down to this. If God is a maximally great being, as most Christians contend, and I sure do, that means he's perfect in power, perfect in knowledge, perfect in love and goodness. So if God is perfectly powerful, it seems like he is powerful enough to stop all this pain, evil, and suffering in the world. If he's perfectly good and loving, well, he would want to stop all this pain, evil, and suffering in the world. And if he's perfectly intelligent, if he's omniscient, then he would know how to use his power to stop all the evil and suffering in the world. But look at all the pain, evil, and suffering in the world. Therefore, the atheist concludes, this maximally great God of yours, Christian, doesn't exist. And atheism is true. Now, I think it's actually a pretty good argument until you start, really parsing things out and analyzing what it means to be a maximally great being. Now, so I don't think the argument passes at all. But that doesn't mean it's not a. What am I trying to say here? I think it's a well-crafted and well thought out argument. I just think it fails at the end. So there's many types of problems of evil arguments. We've got moral evil that we have to deal with. We've got natural evil that we've got to deal with. We've got gratuitous evil that we got to deal with. We've also got something called divine hiddenness. A lot of people would include that under the banner of the problem of evil. I do. Some people might think it doesn't belong there, but I like to put it underneath that umbrella. Anything that ought not be. That's how I like to describe evil, right? What is evil? Something that ought not be. So the problem of evil raises the question, why would a maximally great being allow there to be things that ought not be? That doesn't make sense at face value, but I think it actually does make sense once you do some philosophical and theological heavy lifting.
Would you say that would you say that the problem of evil is one of the most difficult questions for Christians, at least emotionally? What is your view on that?
Oh, I think it's the most difficult question to answer for Christians. I don't think most Christians can adequately answer the question. I think you have to be a well thought out Molinist to be able to answer the question sufficiently. So for the Calvinist who affirms exhaustive divine determinism, to the open theist, I think they're really going to struggle. Even the simple foreknowledge advocate is really going to struggle answering some of these objections. They might be able to answer some of them, but not all of them, because there's a whole bunch of them that the atheists will raise. Remember, I talked about moral evil, natural evil, gratuitous evil, animal suffering, levels of divine hiddenness. Really, I think at the end of the day that Molinism is the only way to sufficiently answer all of them. But so to answer your question, though, it is a big problem for most Christians, and it's I wouldn't even say it's easy. I had to think about this for a long time to solve it with Molinism. But I would say that these are the best reasons to be an atheist, right? These are the best reasons to reject Christian theism and be an atheist. But hear me now, they fail. So if the best reasons to be an atheist eventually fail, there's no reason to be an atheist, or at least that's how I see it.
That was really good. Now, why? Why is Molinism the best way to deal with the problem of evil? Let's try to tackle first one of those, like for example, the problem of natural evil, and why is Molinism very relevant on this?
So I like to just bring it down to one Bible verse. I think Paul answered it 2,000 years ago in 2 Corinthians 4:17, and Paul is being sarcastic here because elsewhere he lists a whole, he provides a whole list of all of his sufferings and his afflictions that he's going through. I mean, more than most humans will ever experience. But then Paul says this, that these light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So, yeah, I mean, whether it be moral evil or natural evil or whatever, all of this stuff that we don't like about this planet and about this world, it's going to prepare us for an eternal weight of glory. It's going to prepare us for eternity. So think about this. Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels, they were all created in states of affairs in which there was no suffering. There wasn't any affliction or pain or evil or anything. And each of them took that perfect state of affairs in the very presence of God for granted, and they wrecked it. Well, tell me this. Thinking about all the pain, evil, and suffering that you've already experienced, when you find yourself in that same state of affairs where suffering doesn't exist, in the very presence of an unhidden God, will you take that state of affairs for granted, like Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels did? Or will you cherish it for eternity? Will you do whatever it takes to make sure that you don't wreck it like they did? I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for myself. I know that I will not make those same mistakes. Why? Because I've learned here in this world that is suffused with pain, evil, suffering, and so much affliction. I've learned from my bad mistakes. I've learned from the mistakes of others. I've learned that a world in which tornadoes and earthquakes and hurricanes, where those can cause suffering, I will cherish being in heaven where those, I don't have to worry about those things causing suffering. I don't have to worry about humans being evil. I'm not going to take that for granted like Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels did. We learn from all these afflictions. We learn from the stupid mistakes that we've made and that others have made. So we could say, in a sense, that I could rebel in heaven just like Satan did. I could do that, but I never would do that. So I want the viewers here to distinguish between could and would. I could do that, but I never would do that. Why? Because we've learned from these light momentary afflictions that are preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. We have learned from these things. And so we'll be too smart for that when we're in heaven, because we've gained this experiential knowledge. So now God, with middle knowledge in mind, he creates a world of free creatures where he knows that free creatures would learn from these light momentary afflictions and therefore would never rebel against God in heaven like Satan did, or as Adam and Eve did in the garden. God knows that we will be too smart for that. And so therefore he can guarantee the perseverance of the saints without violating our libertarian freedom. And if you would like to read more about that, get this little book, because I do talk about it in there.
Again, you throw there a concept. You said middle knowledge. For everybody that doesn't know what that is, again, I would encourage you to go and look at our interview with Tim last year, where we define what middle knowledge is. In a nutshell, it's just God knows what every person, every agent would do under any circumstances before God decreed to create. But yeah, you can get more details on that interview.
Yeah.
Now, that was with respect to the natural evil. If I understood you correctly, God allowed natural evil because he knew that we humans would learn from our mistakes and learn from our moral. In a world, go ahead. Correct.
Yeah, I was just gonna. Yeah, what I talked about there, that encompasses everything. That encompasses our moral mistakes and the moral mistakes of others. We learn from those, but we also learn not to take heaven or the new heavens and the new earth for granted, because here in this world, there's so much natural evil that happens. So if moral evil doesn't get you, and it will, but if moral evil doesn't get you, natural evil is going to get you at some point, whether it be disease or tornadoes or tsunamis or hurricanes or whatever. There's a lot of natural evil that happens. So these light momentary afflictions prepare us for eternity, prepares us for heaven. So when we find ourselves one day, after this life comes to an end, we close our eyes for the last time and take our last breath for the last time, and then we open our eyes on the other side of death, looking into the eyes of Jesus, in a state of perfection and paradise, where there is no more suffering of moral evil or natural evil or any other evil. We will not take that state of affairs for granted. Imagine living in a state of affairs where moral evil has come to an end and natural evil has come to an end. I will embrace that perfection, that paradise in the presence of God. I will embrace it. I will not take it for granted, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. I was also going to say, when you started answering that question and you quoted, was it 2 Corinthians, right?
2 Corinthians 4:17.
The momentary Yeah, I want to let our audience know that for the first time, we have a Molinist on camera quoting scripture. We haven't had that before. All right. Now, a lot of answers to the problem of moral evil, as well as natural evil, I guess, but have been on the line of God permitting evil because there are some reasons that He might have, morally sufficient reasons. And I'm going to put a quote here on the screen about how, like, for example, the philosopher Paul Draper has mentioned that the logical problem of evil is not discussed or considered a forceful argument in academia, because even an omnipotent, omniscient mind might have reasons or to allow evil because of some greater good. Do you think that this is a version of skeptical theism, that God might have reasons for allowing evil, but we as creatures, we don't necessarily are aware of those?
Yeah, I think he's referencing that. And I'm often asked if I'm a skeptical theist. So that like Dr. Craig, I hate that term. But a skeptical theist just means, hey, God might have morally sufficient reasons for allowing all this pain, evil, and suffering. Well, yeah, that's true. I think he does. And guess what? I think we know what it is. I think the Molinist can answer that. So if somebody asks me if I'm a skeptical theist, I'll say, well, not really, but I don't rule it out. But I guess it makes sense to be a skeptical theist if you're not aware of Molinism. But look, based on my study of God's nature and his character, I believe that God created the best feasible, freedom permitting world. So I say this in a paper that is being published probably around the same time, or maybe slightly before this interview is going to be released. But I say this in the paper. I say, so for all we know, the actual world is the best feasible, freedom permitting world, even with its moral, natural, and gratuitous evils, as well as its divine hiddenness. For example, it's possible that the actual world is the one freedom, or the one feasible freedom permitting circumstance where evil is ultimately defeated and all who are not transworld damned are saved. If this specific, feasible, maximal harvest world exists, then a perfectly wise and loving God would create it, no matter how much finite suffering, evil, or divine hiddenness existed, or he'd refrain from creation altogether. So think about that. What an awesome world this is, right? No matter how much finite and momentary pain, evil, and suffering exists and is part of this world, this is the best world with eternity in mind. So if this is that one world where evil is ultimately defeated and everybody that's not transworld damned is saved, and I'll even open the door for the universalist here. I'm not a universalist, so please hear me. And in this book, I argued against universalism. I think universalism is false. But I'll tell you this: if there is a world in which everybody ultimately freely comes to Christ, then God, based on his nature, would create that world, even if they had to live through 1,000,000 years of hell or whatever. So now I don't think that world exists. So I don't think it's a feasible world, but that's going to open the doors to so many other discussions. But we can just bring it down to this. I think this is the best feasible, freedom permitting world God could create. And so no matter how much pain, evil, and suffering is in this world, and how much divine hiddenness is in this world, it's worth it, because God knows what all the good that's going to happen. So I don't have to know all the specific goods. I just have to know, as long as we can see there's no contradiction with saying this is the best freedom, the best feasible freedom permitting world God could create, then it doesn't matter how much pain, evil, and suffering we experience in our few decades of life. When we think about infinity and the eternal future with no end, and that eternal future is is perfect. It's paradise. It's a perfect love relationship with our Creator, the Creator of the universe, and every other human that's there in that circumstance with us. It's just love and perfect paradise into the infinite future. I'll tell you what, a few decades of pain and suffering on this planet, which we also experience a whole bunch of joy and love and goodness here also, by the way. But a few decades of suffering on this planet makes it worth it when we have eternity in mind. So that's the way I see it.
Well, that's going to be painful to translate. I hope people are praying for me. No, it was really good, Tim. It was excellent. Now, you mentioned one of the problems of evil. Well, I don't know if it would be considered a problem of evil or not, but you mentioned a problem that is been discussed very recently in the literature, and I'm glad to hear that you're publishing as well. It's really good to really exciting to see your work developing there. One of the recent arguments that have been put forward by the atheist community, in this case by John Schellenberg,
Mm-hmm.
is the problem of divine hiddenness. Now, he's not the first one that has published on this, but it's been discussed as a really forceful argument, of a logically consistent, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But we're gonna try to discuss and see if it is actually a problem for Christians, for Molinist Christians in this case.
Yeah.
But first, let's discuss what is the argument from divine hiddenness.
Yeah, so John Schellenberg is the one who has done the most work on this. And so Schellenberg's hiddenness argument, I think it's probably the most interesting argument for atheism that I've ever read. I think he makes the best case. Out of all the different problems of evil, I think this is the one that is, he was most creative in this and really offered something for Christians to think about. And again, I don't think most Christians have the tools to solve his problem, but I think the Molinist does. So Schellenberg's hiddenness argument may be stated broadly as follows. One, if God exists, there will never be any non-resistant non-believers. Two, there are some non-resistant non-believers. Three, therefore, God does not exist. So the hiddenness argument depends on the following principle. So I call this principle A in my paper. Necessarily, if God exists, then for some time T and some finite person S who is a non-resistant seeker at T, God will ensure that or provide sufficient evidence for belief in God such that at T, S believes God exists. So you might want to put that up on the screen when you publish this video. But yeah, that's the hiddenness argument. Yeah, that's the hiddenness argument and the principle in which it is, I guess, the foundation of of the argument.
Now, Tim, on premise one of Schellenberg's argument, he says non-resistant believers. Could you explain to us what that means?
Yeah, non-resistant non-believers. So a non-resistant non-believer would be somebody who doesn't believe in God, but is not resistant toward that belief. In fact, I know some who advance this argument who say they want to believe that God exists. They're just not convinced. They just don't think he does. Now, one can doubt, one can be skeptical of their claims that they want God to exist and they want to believe. Sometimes I must admit that I'm skeptical of that, but I'm willing to grant it because I do believe that God would allow there to be a non-resistant non-believer, at least for a time. And so, yeah, non-resistant non-believer would be somebody who doesn't believe in God, but isn't resistant to that belief. In fact, they would say they want to believe, they're sure willing to believe, they just don't believe. And so Schellenberg is saying, hey, that person, and he's going to say there's enough of them. If there's even one of those people, then God wouldn't exist, because God would never allow there to be a non-resistant non-believer. And I say, well, that's just not true. And I provide at least two examples, hypothetical examples, and I give in the footnotes an example of somebody that I think is actually a real life example of a non-resistant non-believer, and show all the good that's coming from that right now. So yeah, just tell people to take a look at my article when it's published.
Mm-hmm. And how does Molinism help us deal with this?
Well, Molinism undercuts that principle A. So why is that the case? Well, since God knows both, one, what a person would freely do in any circumstance they may find themselves in, and two, God also knows the repercussions of the person's free actions. There are feasible scenarios in which God knows it's better that a non-resistant seeker does not become a believer immediately or maybe ever. So, in other words, given God's middle knowledge, it's possible that God will not ensure or provide sufficient evidence for belief in God such that certain non-resistant seekers become believers. Although there are many such possible feasible scenarios. In the paper, my co-author and I offer two scenarios which illustrate the point. But bottom line, as I noted earlier, let me say it again. For all we know, the actual world is the best feasible, freedom-permitting world, even with its moral, natural, and gratuitous evils, as well as its divine hiddenness. For example, it's possible that the actual world is the one feasible, freedom-permitting circumstance where evil is ultimately defeated and all who are not transworld damned are saved. If this specific, feasible, maximal harvest world exists, then a perfectly wise and loving God would either create it, no matter how much finite suffering, evil, or divine hiddenness existed, or refrain from creation altogether. So God starts, you see, God with middle knowledge starts with the end game in mind. So think about Doctor Strange in Infinity War and Endgame, right? Let's bring Marvel into this now. Doctor Strange started with the end game in mind, and that's why he actualized the possible future that had a lot of evil in it, right? So in a sense, you can say that Doctor Strange was responsible for so much of the evil that happened in the movie Endgame. He knew it would happen, and he did it anyway. But you see, he had the end game in mind. And that's why everybody saw him not as a villain, but as a hero. So similarly, God starts with the end game in mind and creates a world in which he knows how to achieve the maximal harvest world, right? Where the most people come to Christ. And if you're a universalist, you'd say where everybody comes to Christ. Again, I'm not a universalist, but I'm just opening the door for that possibility here. So a God who truly is the Alpha and Omega and knows the beginning and the end can incorporate free creatures and their decisions into his perfect plan. And once one grasps this, they're often drawn to worship. I mean, I was, and I still am when I think about this. And I can see why God allows the suffering that I go through and why God allows the suffering that others go through. And I see it's worth it. God has the end game in mind, and what is meant for evil will be used for good. And that's why God, I think in Genesis 1, called this world very good, because he knew all the evil that was going to happen, but he also knew that we also see in the end of Genesis, in Genesis 50, that what is meant for evil will be used for good. And we see it in the New Testament as well. All things work together for good for those who love him and people that are in heaven. The only people that go to heaven are those who are in a love relationship with Christ, with the creator of the universe. So yeah, it's really kind of exciting when you think about it. Look, I hate suffering. I try to avoid it. I absolutely hate it. But when I find myself in times of suffering, and I went through some bad times a couple years ago, where several problems of evil hit me all at once, I had peace. I was working on my doctoral dissertation at the time, writing about why God allows suffering, and then suffering hit me. Bam, bam, just, it's horrible. And I hated it, and I wanted out. But I also had to ask myself, do I really believe what I'm writing here? And I did. And it really helped get through it, and it helped me recover when that season was over. Yeah, it's really pretty cool. It draws me to worship, and I hope it does the same for others.
Yeah, indeed, because obviously I don't know what situation you were a couple of years ago, but it does bring up the importance of Christians being prepared to deal with both intellectual and emotional, spiritual dry seasons, because when you know that this is the truth, no matter what you're feeling, no matter what you're experiencing, you keep moving forward. So thanks for sharing that with us. Let me read something to you that I took from your response to Schellenberg's argument and get your thoughts on this. Because you and Jacob Erasmus have wrote a paper responding to Schellenberg. But
yeah, that's the paper.
You mentioned that something very interesting. You said there are feasible scenarios in which it is better that a non-resistant seeker like Joe does not become a believer immediately or perhaps at all. Given God's middle knowledge, it is possible that God will not ensure or provide sufficient evidence for belief in God such that a certain non-resistant seeker become believers. Now, while I agree with most of this, and I think it's a pretty good response, I want to focus on the perhaps at all that Joe will not become a believer perhaps at all. The question would be, how does your view avoid the charge of utilitarianism, or being more explicit, God sacrificing Susie's salvation, let's say, Joe's salvation, because only in that world in which Joe is not saved at all, Susie, another person, is saved.
Okay. Well, I think we just kind of shared that controversial line in case anybody came up with some crazy thought experiment. But we're just covering our bases. But with that said, let me flesh that out a little bit. God knows if a non-resistant non-believer would or would not eventually become a resistant non-believer, even after coming to believe in the existence of God, right? So God with middle knowledge would know this, right? If Molinism is true, God would know this. So if this is the case, God knows if it would be better to let this non-resistant non-believer remain a non-believer. In fact, it might be an act of mercy when you think about it. It might be an act of mercy as his judgment would be less severe than the one who came to believe that Christianity was in fact true, but rejected Christ anyway. So yeah, if Molinism is true and God has this middle knowledge, he knows if it would be better for this person to actually become a believer. And when I say believer, I'm not talking about a Christian kind of believer. I'm talking about just somebody who believes that God exists. Obviously, Muslims are believers in the existence of God. People who practice Judaism believe in the existence of God, but they're not. They reject Christ. So, I think that could be an act of mercy. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Would you say that maybe believer, like an acceptance of the existence of God, like acknowledges the existence of God, but doesn't necessarily embrace Christ, his sacrifice, the resurrection?
Oh yeah. No, and I actually know people who believe that. I've met folks who would say that they believe that God exists and raised Jesus from the dead, but they reject him anyway. And I don't know a lot of people like that, but even this last weekend, I was at a conference and we went out around Omaha, Nebraska, and we did some evangelism. And I actually met somebody who said this. It was crazy. So think about the judgment that that person's going to go through. They believe that God exists. They believe that God raised Jesus from the dead. They believe that Christianity is true, but they reject it because they want to live life their own way. And they don't like, I think it came down to the sexual ethics of Christ. I don't think people, some people want to live life their own way and don't want to live according to the law of Christ. That's my hunch. I don't know for sure.
Well, let's keep praying for that person. I guess that's the only thing that we can do for them now. Now, let's jump to, as we draw near to the close of this, to the end of this interview, let's jump to another subject, which is another controversial subject, which is evolution. Right? Many Christians, both in the U.S. and in Latin America, I've met people on both sides of the border that reject evolution because they believe that it is incompatible with Christianity. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that ever since I was a little kid, everyone from pastors to professors, from Christian pastors to atheist professors and everybody in between have advanced the view that if Christianity is true, then evolution is false. And that if evolution is true, then Christianity is false. And, I don't think they're right about that. I think that's a false dichotomy.
Yeah, indeed. I heard that as well when I was younger and then encountered the blessing of YouTube and found a couple of young earth creationists there, and their arguments convinced me for a little while. Then I met Dr. Craig, and I came out of that system. And we're actually going to have an interview with one of my favorite apologists, Michael Jones, who's going to be talking about us if Genesis actually contradicts the theory of evolution and all of that. But it's going to be really good.
Yeah, Mike and I have.
I've seen.
Pardon me?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mike and I have had some good conversations on that, and I look forward to seeing that video when you release it.
Yeah, we cover a lot of ground there. Cool. Now, I've seen you both in your blog and in your book. You've argued that Molinism can actually make sense of God using evolution, even if one doesn't embrace evolution. One can leave the door open to it in the case that there's some scientific discovery that's unrefutable or that nobody can doubt it, which I doubt that something like that will happen. But even if someone doesn't embrace evolution, you've argued that Molinism can make sense of God using evolution. Can you share with us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I don't affirm evolution. I'm just saying, well, wow, if it happened, if it turns out that it's true, I don't care because I've seen how to connect these dots. I can see that it's compatible with Scripture and it's compatible with Christianity. So that doesn't mean that I'm affirming evolution. I'm just saying, hey, if they dig up all the transitionary fossils tomorrow, I don't care because it's not going to affect my faith in the slightest. So, in fact, it might even strengthen my faith if that's possible, because I think the only way that evolution could be true is if God exists. But anyway, the topic of the evolutionary origin of man and the universe has occupied much of the time of the apologist and theologian and people just trying to argue for Christianity in the lost world that we find ourselves in, right? So some apologists have devoted their entire career laser focused on arguing against the idea that humans evolved from a single-celled common ancestor. However, as I noted in my Mere Molinism book, if anyone, especially students, should claim to have become an atheist, and I don't mean especially students, but we often see that this happens to students when they're in the college classroom or even the high school classroom. So if anyone should claim to have become an atheist because of believing in evolution, a response could be crafted like this one. And let me read this from my book. I said, it's on page 274. I said, evolution really is not a reason not to believe in God. If God is omnipotent and omniscient, logically prior to his creative decree, which would mean that God possesses middle knowledge, right? So if God is omnipotent and omniscient, logically prior to his creative decree, then creating the world and man via evolution is no problem for God. Could it not be that what appears to be random or by chance to humans is actually precisely the perfect plan of God's intelligently designed and finely tuned initial conditions of the Big Bang? End quote. So a response like this takes the problem of evolution off the table so that the apologist or the evangelist can then discuss the evidence of the existence of God and the historical data demonstrating that the resurrection of Jesus Christ actually happened. So this approach to reasoning is not to suggest that theistic evolution actually is true. Like I said, I don't affirm that it actually is true, but with what I call back pocket apologetics in mind, one can point out that if God is omnipotent and possesses full knowledge of what could and will happen, and also knows what would happen in all other scenarios, which is middle knowledge, then creating via evolutionary means is simply no problem at all for a maximally great being. So the God who knew what a finely tuned universe or what a finely tuned universe would require could have brought it about in any number of ways. And this includes the following possibility. Well, would you like me to share my model? My Molinism could be biblical model?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So it's, let's see here. It's 15 steps. Don't confuse this with a syllogism. It's just steps of a model. So the first step, God exists and possesses both natural and middle knowledge. 2, fine-tuned initial conditions of the Big Bang. God chooses and actualizes this world and all that will happen in it. 3, the universe unfolds as planned over time. 4, our solar system and Earth eventually come into existence as planned. 5, life evolves over time exactly the way God knew it would via his intelligent design of the finely tuned initial conditions of the Big Bang. 6, hominids evolve as planned, not by accident. 7, God breathes his image, the soul, into the hominid, making the first human in another act of special creation. Or God literally creates a physically identical human from the dirt. Take your pick. 8, God does the same thing with a female hominid and then breathes his image into her, making the first female human. Or God literally creates Eve from the rib of Adam. Take your pick. 9, God separates Adam and Eve from the other soulless hominids who are physically identical but not spiritually, and places them in the Garden of Eden with the tree of life. So as long as they eat of this tree, they will never experience physical death. 10, after the fall of man into sin, Adam and Eve are expelled from the paradise of the Garden of Eden and the tree of life. So now they will eventually die since they don't have access to the tree of life. 11, after Adam and Eve's son, Cain, kills their other son, Abel, Cain is expelled from the world's only human tribe. Now Cain is scared of the other soulless hominids who may kill him. We see that in Genesis 4:13 and 14. 12, Cain finds a physically identical but soulless hominid female as a wife. Genesis 4:17. The human soul is always passed on to offspring, and this avoids any bottlenecking problems that are often raised by the scientists. 13, the human soul is a trait preferred via natural selection as it allows for rationality. And if people would like to see more about that, see my free thinking argument against naturalism. 14. Soon, all hominids have souls created in the image of God. Therefore, now all hominids are human. That is, all humans are hominids, but not all hominids have been human. And finally, step 15. This is exactly the way God planned and designed life to unfold. It all started with the fine-tuned initial conditions of the Big Bang. So really, this is kind of it's tacked on to the fine-tuning argument for God's existence. And once one understands the fine-tuning argument, one can see that there's no reason that God couldn't create via evolution as well, but it would still be intelligent design as opposed to randomness or chance. It might look like random chance from the human perspective, but from God's perspective, it's intelligent design. So, and look, it's vital to grasp that I am not suggesting that this model is true. I'm not saying that. So please I don't want to see it on social media that Tim Stratton affirms evolution or that Tim Stratton thinks that evolution is true. I'm not saying that. I'm simply offering a model showing that it's possibly true, a model that is not logically incoherent and one that also jives with scripture. That one can keep in their back pocket. And this model shows that evolution and biblical Christianity are not necessarily mutually exclusive views, and that they can both be true simultaneously. So this application of what I call back pocket apologetics, you keep this, you don't have to believe it's true, but you keep it in your back pocket and you pull it out if you need it when you're doing apologetics or evangelism. So this allows one to bypass the emotionally charged argument of evolution, avoid the distraction of non-essential matters, and then be free to present the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ. The only thing that really matters, right, is the existence of God and the resurrection of Jesus, right? 1 Corinthians 15, 14 through 17. So this allows Christians to engage the culture, and it removes this stumbling block with those in many academic circles who are also convinced that evolution is true. And as my colleague Scott Olson likes to say, he says, sprinkle a little bit of Molinism on the issue and the problem melts away. Well, Molinism and middle knowledge allows the apologist to show the thinking person that there are at least models that demonstrate the evolution and all science is compatible with biblical Christianity. Now, William Lane Craig has also employed a similar tactic when debating atheists. In his famous debate against Christopher Hitchens, Dr. Craig explained how physicists John Barrow and Frank Tipler show that there are at least 10 steps in the course of human evolution which must occur. And each step is so improbable that before it could occur, the sun would have ceased to be a main sequence star and would have incinerated the Earth. And Craig notes that the physicists, these physicists, Barrow and Tipler, they go on to calculate the probability of the evolution of the human genome by chance. And they arrive at the astronomical figure. Let me read it here. It's 4 to the negative 180th power to the 100,000th power, or 110,000th power, and 4 to the negative 360th power to the 110,000th power. So I can't even fathom that huge number. But this equation demonstrates that Darwinian evolution is mathematically impossible if naturalism is also true, if God doesn't exist. So Dr. Craig concludes and says this, quote, if evolution did occur on this planet, it was literally a miracle and therefore evidence of the existence of God. Evolution is the only game in town for the atheist, no matter how fantastic the odds, no matter how improbable, no matter what the fossil record reveals or what the evidence that a person can empirically investigate via the scientific method can show. Evolution has to be true for atheists because it's their only option. Unlike the atheist, Christians are free to follow the scientific evidence wherever it leads. So I just love that quote from Dr. Craig.
Wow. Yeah, it was really good. And I think it's a great way to answer. That quote from Dr. Craig with Christopher Hitchens. Yeah, that was a mic drop. That was a really great moment in that debate. And yeah, Hitchens didn't actually have any response to that.
No, he didn't.
It was really great. Tim, before we go, I just want to thank you again for your time and your effort and being here. I really appreciate you, brother. Every time that you share stuff, I learn something new.
Cool.
Just for our audience, where can our audience find you? Find your material?
I'm doing a lot of work on YouTube right now, so I would encourage viewers to go to YouTube and search for Free Thinking Ministries. Make sure you subscribe. There you go. And you can also find my blogs, my regular blogs on my website, freethinkingministries.com. And then again, these books are out. I'm working on more books right now, but you want to get these, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism, and the Study Guide. And I've got papers in academic journals. Got a couple that are published right now and another coming out this spring, probably shortly before this video is released. And I've got others that I'm working on. So yeah, but the best place to get regular content is from the YouTube channel and the website.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And you have other collaborators on your blog as well. And you have sometimes guests invited to your YouTube channel. Really good. So again, people, if you want to know more about Molinism from Tim's perspective, the applications he has made to other subjects like evolution, problem of evil, animal suffering. I think you have an article on that. Is that yours or
well, yeah, the one dealing with divine hiddenness, I think in one fell swoop deals with the problem of divine hiddenness and all the other problems of evil. I think we can take them all off the table.
Awesome. Well, let me just say goodbye to our audience, Tim. Thank you so much again, brother.
You bet.
Esta entrevista fue excelente. Yo, que siendo molinista, sigo aprendiendo bastantes cosas con Tim e interactuando con otros molinistas también. No todos están de acuerdo con Tim, no todos están de acuerdo con el Dr. Craig, pero siempre vamos construyendo y creciendo en conocimiento cuando exponemos diferentes puntos de vista y discutimos y dialogamos, pero todo en amor y en armonía cristiana. Esperamos que esta entrevista te haya gustado. Sigue con nosotros en Facts 2022 y espera más contenido en nuestras conferencias. Un abrazo a todos y nos vemos en la siguiente entrevista.